Never in history has a former president been indicted, especially for misdemeanors so minor that no one would have been charged. Unless, of course, your name is Donald Trump. Well, today, a top attorney discusses what he calls an unlawful election conspiracy. This is going to be so interesting. Stay with us. Welcome to the Moms for America podcast. Each week, special guests tackle the issues facing the moms of America today. Discussions include personal stories and advice on how moms can build a strong foundation of faith, family, and freedom in their homes and country. Hi, moms. I'm Debbie Carlitis, your host, and thank you so much for joining us once again today. Right here at the top of the show, I always want to invite everyone to like, subscribe, and share our podcast. We also ask that you share this with your friends, your mama friends in your circle. This is going to be another very interesting podcast because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about what is happening to Donald Trump. Also, here at the top of the show, I want to invite all of you that are listening to join the movement here at Moms for America. Have you signed up? Have you joined the movement? A lot of moms will ask us, what's the membership? What does it cost? Nothing. Everything we do is for free. We are here to support and help you moms. We are moms uniting all across the country. We are fighting for faith, family, freedom, and the Constitution. So please check us out at Moms for America. Join the movement, join the sisterhood, and we're here to help and support you. Also, if you have an idea or a topic for the podcast, please email me at podcast@momsforamerica.net. I would love to hear from you and love to hear your suggestions. All righty. Well, on to today's program. Well, John O'Connor has been practicing law in California for over 50 years. Before entering private practice, John was a federal prosecutor in San Francisco, and he worked on cases involving petty Hearst, terrorist groups, and the government's response to the OPEC oil crisis in Northern California. John has followed the hush money trial of President Trump, and he has a copy of the jury's instructions that were read to the jurors right before they went into deliberations. Well, he is here to give us his legal opinion of what happened during the trial and why he believes the jury's instructions guaranteed a guilty verdict. Well, welcome, John, to the Moms for America podcast. Boy, this is going to be a very interesting discussion. Thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
All right, John. In the beginning, we always ask everyone, now you're not a mom. Clearly, we know that. You're a dad, a granddad. What's your family like?
Well, I have 3 children. I've been married for 47 years, something like that.
Congratulations.
And I was one of 8 children growing up. My father and mother were long married, of course, and he was one of 8 children. My mother from Texas was one of 6 children, I believe. So there are plenty of. I grew up. I had 30 first cousins just on my on my paternal grandmother's side. So there are always a lot of family around.
Yeah, and then grandchildren for you too, right?
Well, yeah, just one so far. I mean, he's a great kid, but I claim my kids were afraid that they wouldn't match the high standards of my wife and my marriage. It's my joke, of course, but they all got married late, and so we only have one grandchild. Yeah.
Okay, well, good. So you came from a large family. You've got kids. You're a grandfather. I know that you're concerned not only about this case, but you're also concerned about the future of America. And I think that's why we're having this discussion. What is happening to President Trump is something literally that can happen to all of us, but it'll be packaged differently. And when the legal system is no longer fair, America literally is in jeopardy. So let's jump into this, John. Huge legal, background for yourself. President Trump in general, he's got a lot of indictments we're going to get into the specific one that just happened, but what about the overall attack on President Trump? How do you see this? And what is your opinion on what's happening to him in the big picture?
Clearly, the cases are politically motivated. They did not rise organically, so to speak, as other cases do, where there's some obvious wrong and someone needs to be punished. We all know about that. Someone gets murdered, or someone gets money stolen, embezzled, or there's a collapse of a company like Enron, for example. Lawsuits and indictments naturally flow from catastrophic losses. But what happened here? What is he being indicted for in all these cases? Really for nothing. This
Mm.
present case in New York is especially troublesome because what he is being indicted for, no one knew about. It was basically some ledger entry, probably gathering dust in the files of the Trump organization, or I should say 34 entries, really about the same series of payments back and forth with Michael Cohen.
Okay, now, before we get into that real specifically, I kind of want to lead up to this a little bit because, and again, we're going to do a deep dive into that. But if a former president, a current candidate for president, has never faced charges like this before in American history, correct? I mean, this has
Right.
never happened. And what does this mean in general to our republic? And like I said, we're going to get into this real specifically and have you analyze this case for us. But this has never happened, and this is setting a precedent, correct?
Well, certainly, it's a way of fighting a political battle using the courts. Uh, uh, the Biden administration, as well as its allies in the state courts in New York and in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, are using the legal system as a political weapon against a very successful former president.
Political, right. So this is bigger than we all know here. I want to talk about the fact that this is opening up Pandora's box too. Um, is this something that you usually see in other countries? This type of manipulation, conspiracy, I don't want to say bribery. I'm not even sure what words to use on this. This is what we see in banana republic countries, not in a constitutional country.
Oh, that's right. And it's especially been big in any authoritarian country, especially ideologically authoritarian, such as Russia and China, places
Mhm.
like that. It started out with, well, with the as soon as Lenin took over
Mhm.
in Russia in 1917 or so, there have been show trials ever since then. And Joseph Stalin was the master of the show trial. But you'll
Mm.
often see this in less developed countries when one party takes power and they punish the other power. And it's
Mm.
just it's like it's a form of brute force.
A
And
form of
it's
brute
really
force,
too
yeah.
bad because you are not playing by the rules. There should be rules that are the same for everybody.
Mhm.
And if they are the same for everybody, we are all protected. We all know what standards to live up to. And as long as we do that, we know that we're free. Some of
Ah,
this is being part of a free country.
mhm.
And now, think about it. Now you can be indicted just about for anything if somebody wants to indict you.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
This is
uh,
it. This is the smoke. This is the smoking gun. This is where it all, the rubber meets the road. And this is why this is so scary. I also want to ask you too real quick before we get into this, John. Bernie Sanders, and this is another shocking ridiculous story. He is trying to remove the Secret Service protection for any type of incarcerated presidents. What would that mean for President Trump? And could this potentially, if he goes to jail, put his life in danger? No Secret Service?
well, that's right. Absolutely. Um, you're basically, and it just shows you the depths to which
Yes.
people like Sanders are going when you really are talking about, in essence, a death warrant for your political enemy. Because that's what will happen to him. He will get killed or beaten severely if he is not protected in prison. Think about this, especially with all the venom that has been spewed about this guy throughout his recent political career.
So disturbing. I mean, you wanna talk about I mean, it's it's so disturbing, it's, like, hard to even get past it that somebody would even suggest that. Alright, so let's talk about, we're gonna get into the case now. I think a lot of us just can't understand truly what happened. What was all of the drama? What was the jury? What was the judge? What was hush money? All this stuff. So I do want to ask you first too, though, straight up for everyone to understand, because this is all about hush money payments, right? Are is hush money payment, are they illegal or legal? What is the story with hush money payments?
The prosecution tried to make the jury believe that there was something wrong about getting together to make hush money payments to this porn star, Stormy Daniels, who was essentially extorting President Trump, saying, I'm going to go public with my revelations unless you pay me money. But there's nothing illegal about that. Uh,
Mm.
and furthermore, non disclosure agreements or payments for non disclosure agreements are not campaign expenditures, those are personal expenditures. So, number one, it's perfectly legal to have a non disclosure agreement and pay for it. And number two, it has nothing to do with the campaign, technically. I mean, let's put the shoe on the other foot. If I paid money to a candidate for office, I would not want him spending money to pay off his mistress. And that would be considered a wrongful campaign expenditure. That should make that person go to jail. So there's nothing, there's not only nothing illegal about it, it has nothing to do, strictly speaking, with the campaign or a campaign expenditure, even though it
Mm.
may have campaign implications. I can buy a new suit because I'm running for office. That doesn't mean that that's a valid campaign expenditure. I may want my teeth straightened. I may want to get a new car. But all of these things should not be paid out of campaign funds, and they're not campaign expenditures. But the jury was led to believe that somehow getting together to pay off a porn star, or there was another allegation about Trump, about the National Enquirer killing a story about of salacious nature with Trump.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with those things. The jury was led to believe
Mm.
that this was an illegal election conspiracy, but it was not. When it
Okay.
came time for the legal instructions, that's not what the charges were. The charges were very technical, but I don't think the way the case was instructed, the way it was tried, the jury really understood that.
Okay. Well, I want to get into this too. And I do want to say right here, this is not a discussion on whether President Trump had an affair with Stormy Daniels. That's not this discussion. This discussion and whatever President Trump has done in his life, that is not what we're holding court here about. What we're talking about fully is about the legal process being abused. So I'm clearing that with all of our moms, because I don't want them to feel like this is we're getting to into morals or values or anything. This is not what this is about. Again, this is about a fairness and a legal court in our legal system. So, can you briefly explain what the 34 indictments were about? Because a lot of people think there was actually 34 different things happening, but no, that's not what it's about.
Now, there was a series of payments. What happened was uh, there was an agreement that Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, would arrange to pay Stormy Daniels $130,000. I'm not so sure Trump knew the exact amount, but pay her some amount of money uh, to sign a non disclosure agreement and not go public with this affair, which would obviously harm Trump both politically and domestically. I don't think at the time of this affair, which was now 18 years ago, if you can believe it, the affair 18 years ago, or it was really a one night stand when he's off at a golf tournament. His wife, Melania, was pregnant, and it's an embarrassing personal thing for anyone to have that exposed. So it was not only political embarrassing, it was domestically embarrassing for President Trump. So they agreed to make this payment to Daniels. Then what happened was Cohen arranged to have the Trump organization pay him back. Now, he was very clever about it, and he ended up getting paid back $420,000, which involved, some of it involved his fees, some of it involved taxes he was going to pay. I think they owed him $50,000 for another settlement he made that had nothing to do with this. But then over 12 months, he would send invoices for an equal amount of $35,000 each month until the $420,000 was paid off. That series of invoices and checks were all considered part of this falsification of business records. In New York, it's a misdemeanor, at least, to have a false business record. And that was the charge. I'm not so sure the business records were false. They were listed on the Trump's books. These were listed as legal expense per a retainer agreement from Cohen.
Okay.
And I actually think the records were what you would expect. But nonetheless, the idea was that these entries were false. Now, it's only a felony. This is the key to this case.
Okay.
The statute of limitations expired on this false records charge many years ago.
Okay.
However,
Important factor. Okay.
it's an important factor. However, the statute is longer if the misdemeanor becomes a felony. The misdemeanor of false records becomes a felony, a low-grade felony, but a felony nonetheless, if the falsification is intended to cover up another crime. Sometimes one might, for instance, put in a false business record that you're later going to use, say, to fool the immigration service, or you're going to use to do something else with it. If that false record is also for the purpose of committing another crime, then it becomes a felony. Now,
this is where it all starts building, correct?
Yeah, and this is where it gets tricky, because originally in the indictment, Trump was not even told what the second crime was. He kept asking, "What's the second crime?" Because I need to defend myself. He was not told what the second crime was until he showed up at trial.
And is that usual or unusual?
Oh, it's not only unusual, it's in my view, it's unconstitutional.
Yes.
I was a federal prosecutor. You have to tell
how do they get away with this stuff, John? That's what drives me crazy. How do they get away with this?
Well, they get away with it because there was a hand-picked judge who was put into office by the Democratic Party in New York. He wasn't elected, as most are in New York, but he's clearly a partisan guy. And this case, and I think there's another case in New York, went to him. And he's very anti-Trump and pro-Biden. I believe he was a member of some group that was more than just the Democratic Party. It was a specific anti-Trump group.
Yeah.
So he allowed district attorney not to name the crime.
Crazy.
The district attorney said it was enough for me to just charge him with false business records with the intent to commit another crime without saying what the crime was. Now, let me add something to that, Debbie, if I can.
Yeah.
Trump was not told what the crime was until he got to trial. The crime was said to be an unlawful election conspiracy. All right. And that's all that was told the jury. That was all that was told to Trump. Now, what's deceiving about that? Now, under the New York statute of unlawful election conspiracies, you have to promote a candidacy with unlawful means, quote, unlawful means. Otherwise, everybody promotes a candidate. A political campaign is a conspiracy, a legal conspiracy to elect somebody. So the only way that you can have an illegal election conspiracy is if in turn there's something you're doing that's unlawful in promoting an election. But now this is a little bit complicated, but it's complicated for the jury. The jury was not told, nor was Trump told, what the unlawful means were. All that was said was, gee, this is an election conspiracy, And the jury doesn't know any better. The jury goes, okay, this is a case about an election conspiracy that's unlawful.
Right. We're just going with what they're telling us, basically.
That's right. They don't
Right.
know any
They don't
better.
know. Right.
They
I
don't know any
wouldn't.
better. And
Yeah.
no one tells the jury that which you and I just talked about, that there's nothing illegal or unlawful about paying off a porn star and about getting a non-disclosure agreement. But that's what the jury was led to believe. They were led to believe that that was the unlawful conspiracy. And it obviously sounds kind of shady, as you told your audience.
Right.
Oh, gee, you're getting together to pay off a porn star. And the prosecution treated this as if they were just revealing some, terrible truth. There's nothing illegal about it. It's quite common. I'm sure Bill Clinton did this often, but it's none of
Yeah.
our
But
business, really, in a
yeah,
way.
we
It really isn't
yeah.
our business.
And anything
Uh,
that Bill Clinton did, nobody ever talked about anyways. They just let, yeah, right. So,
they let that go, and he's, boys will be boys and so forth. But then this happens with Trump. So, so the jury was led to believe that his lawyers did not even know what the quote unlawful means were. So the whole trial boiled down to, were there unlawful means to pursue an election? No one was told what they were, but the jury was led to believe that we're talking about this conspiracy to pay off Stormy Daniels as if that's the crime. It wasn't the crime.
hmm.
Now, when we get to the instructions, there's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo.
And this is a lot of people talked about the instructions to the jury. And I know you want to talk about this specifically, and that basically, if I understand this correctly, John, that this was basically an ensured a guilty verdict, right? The way they packaged this with the jury. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right.
Like it was
Right.
it was a done deal?
Right. Exactly. So, for instance, we talked before, Debbie, about the prosecution being required to show unlawful means. So, unlawful means to promote an election. Well, uh, that should be left to the jury. The jury should have to show that something is unlawful. And by unlawful, that has a specific meaning. It has to mean the defendant knows what he's doing is wrong.
Okay.
You and I could make a mistake in keeping our records. It doesn't mean you go to jail. You have to
Okay.
do it with intent to do something wrong,
And
and so
intent's
forth.
always hard to prove, correct?
Right. And that's why when people, for instance, all over the country, people are going to make mistakes on their tax returns. The IRS doesn't prosecute every one of those because they couldn't prove intent in most cases. Now, if somebody goes out of their way to hide a few $100,000 and you can show that they had the money and took steps to hide it from the IRS, okay, the IRS can say, okay, we can show intent here. In this case, the jury I underline, should have been instructed that Trump had to know what he was doing was wrong, was unlawful. There was no showing of that.
Okay.
And the jury should have also decided not only that, but whether, I said unlawful means is defined as an act or a system that brings about a result. Now, the jury also didn't just have to decide whether what Trump did was a means to an end, a means to get elected.
Mm.
And here's why I say that. Because the judge then instructed, okay, here are three unlawful means. If you find any of these were done, then you can convict Trump. Well, wait a second.
Any of the three.
And
So
he named
pick
them.
one. Pick one. Right.
Well, pick one. But here's my point, Debbie. This is what sort of passes by the attention of the media. The judge is calling them unlawful means. He's not saying, I want you to decide whether these three things are unlawful means. And if you decide they're unlawful means, then you can convict Trump.
Okay.
Okay. But he said in his instruction, I hereby instruct you that there are three unlawful means. If you find either of those, any of those were performed by the defendant, you can find him guilty. Well, that's like saying, if you can show that John O'Connor is talking to Debbie, well, then you can convict him. Well,
Mm,
it's clear I'm talking to Debbie.
right.
It's just there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That's not, I'm not committing an election crime here talking to you. But
So,
if the
boy, these
judge,
words that the judge was using, this was so strategic.
right,
So
right,
strategic, Jen.
and the jury thinks this is normal. Oh, gee, the judge
Right.
says one of these three things are unlawful means. I'll give you an example of one of the unlawful means. One of the unlawful means, supposedly to promote a candidacy, was Michael Cohen's LLC documents that he used to create an LLC to facilitate these payments.
Okay.
Uh, Now, I don't know that there's anything wrong with those documents that Michael Cohen put together, but the judge said, "Oh, well, you can consider Michael Cohen's LLC documents as unlawful means."
Unlawful. Hmm.
Well, first of all, why are they unlawful? And did Trump even know they existed? Did Michael
Right.
Cohen think that they were unlawful?
Uh-huh.
No. And did they have anything to do with the election? Were they a means? In other words,
Mm,
did any voter see the LLC documents? And then he gave them some other things that were supposedly unlawful means. But like one of the unlawful means is the original false records themselves, so that the jury could determine that the original false records were intended to commit the second crime of the original false records. So it's sort of a circular.
wow.
So it was a circular. One of the charges was circular. The false records, could then be used, so forth, to
If it's this
convict him.
complicated for everyone, I mean, it's so complicated that really I can understand how maybe they didn't understand what was going on. But here's what I don't understand, John. Why wasn't um, President Trump's team able to clear that? You just can't get past that because the judge set it up that way. I mean, there was just no way of peeling back the onion on this.
Sure. What happened was Trump didn't even know these so-called unlawful means, which supposedly makes him a criminal. He didn't even know what the charge was until after the trial was over,
I know. Okay, right. You did
and the
say
judge
that.
was
Yeah.
giving instructions to the jury. So Trump's sitting there at the counsel table and he's never heard about the unlawful means. Everything depended on the unlawful means. He wasn't told what they were supposed to be until the instructions.
And
Now
then
you
they
tell me,
couldn't handle that. They couldn't address that case. They couldn't address the
right,
basis of it, basically, huh?
should have been in the indictment many months ago. Okay.
Ah,
And it certainly should have been told them before trial. And then
yes.
as the lawyers, and interestingly, during the trial, just simply anticipating that the prosecution would come up with something about the election, the Trump team offered as a witness Mr. Brad Smith, who had headed up the Federal Elections Commission,
Oh,
to
right.
tell the jury that there was nothing illegal about anything that Trump had done or that Cohen had done to help Trump, that all of that had nothing to do with the campaign, was not in the legal campaign contribution, and so forth and so
I
on.
heard that, right.
Now, now, they didn't know at the time that in the instructions, one of the instructions, one of the unlawful means, he would be to claim that when Cohen advanced money to Stormy Daniels, that was somehow a campaign contribution, even though Trump repaid him for it. But so they didn't know that at the time. But
Mm,
had the judge allowed this testimony, it would
okay.
have covered that unlawful means.
Mm,
If you see what I mean. In other words, it
say,
would have
right.
anticipated that, in other words, that would have clearly acquitted Trump had they been allowed to do that. But in any case, my point is that it's so amazingly unfair. I've never seen a trial like this where the defendant doesn't even know what he's being charged with until the judge is telling the jury in the final instructions
Wow.
what is up here.
So,
And then,
John,
yeah,
can I just ask you here, just because I know I am just, I'm just sitting here in my home going, I just still don't get it. I still don't understand how that wouldn't, and I don't even know these terms. Why wouldn't that be considered like mismanagement of a trial or illegal or, just would get thrown out? I still don't understand why it was allowed. I understand that the judge was bought and paid for basically, but there, you just can do this? I guess this happens more than
Well,
we
here's what
know.
I would say. Normally, a judge would not act like this because he's afraid of getting reversed on appeal, even if he wanted to. First of all, most judges, the vast majority of judges, may have biases and prejudices, but they're straight and they try to follow the law. Their
Right.
discretion might go one way or the other, whether they're liberal or conservative and so forth and so on. But by and large, across the board, judges try to follow the law and they don't like to be reversed by the appellate court. In other words, when you appeal the case, no
Correct.
judge wants to get his hand slapped by an appellate court that says, oh, trial judge, you did wrong. So that's the sort of the incentive,
Mm,
so to speak, a trial judge has,
okay.
because he doesn't want this published case out there saying, Judge
Right.
Judge Smith blew it again. Here's another mistake
Especially
he made.
something as high profile as this, but I guess this judge doesn't care.
No, nobody cares, and the reason being that it is a naked campaign ploy, because this thing will get reversed, but it won't get reversed until after the election. So
Yes.
this is
This is
done
it.
with a very much of malice aforethought, so to speak,
Mhm.
that it was planned this way. It's very cynical. If you recall,
Mhm.
Harry Reid, for instance, made a speech about, I want to say about Mitt Romney from the floor of the Senate. And of course, he was lying, but no one could figure that out till after the election. And Adam Schiff made statements about Russian collusion that later turned out to be false. Well, and this whole thing about Hunter's laptop being disinformation is
Mm,
all of that can be proven false, but that comes later. So uh, uh,
yeah.
Winston Churchill once said that a lie gets three-fourths around the world, around the globe, before truth gets its pants on. And
Wow.
that's one of the things that these folks are relying on. That right now they're out there calling Trump a convicted felon.
Felon, right.
And Bernie Sanders is making these outrageous comments. Well, the reason they're doing it, they want Trump to be smeared. And
Sure.
they know that there are certain voters who have said that they consider that a disqualifying event if a
Mhm.
candidate gets convicted of a felony. So all they
Right.
had to do is convict him of a felony. Nobody understands what happened.
Yeah.
There are very few lawyers I know have taken the time, as I did, to go print out the instructions to the jury and
Uh,
to find out what was going on and to follow this. Most of us don't have the time. I just do
right.
this as a hobby. But
But
uh,
it's
and
important because if we don't understand what's happening to him, and it really is a mistrial, and it really is election interference at its, I'll say its finest, but I mean that not in a respectful way. They have done everything to keep President Trump off that ballot, and they're trying to keep him off the campaign trail, in jail as a felon, and just not let him, and now not give him Secret Service. I mean, I don't know how much clearer, whether you like President Trump or you don't. I don't know how much clearer it could be that this is a total witch hunt.
well, that's right, Debbie, it is. But the second leg of this problem is the main media.
Yeah,
Here it is. I'm telling you about these instructions. There are people that are paid to do nothing more than report on this trial. And why haven't they reported on what I'm talking about?
there you
Number
go.
one, number one, many of them just wouldn't know what I know. They probably haven't gone to real lawyers to analyze this. But more importantly, there are people like me that are available to talk to the news people. They could find out what I'm
Sure.
talking about. They don't want to. They
Hmm.
don't want to tell the public about this.
Right.
Vast majority of the mainstream media are very much pro-democratic.
Right. They're all in the same camp, unfortunately. And then there goes not only the legal system, but journalism. And we know that both of these have just really fallen by the wayside in so many ways here in America. What do you think will happen? Do you think that there will be, so you think the appeal, you think he will go to jail? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what do you think is going to happen? Who
Well,
knows?
this judge may sentence him to jail. Um, um, and to embarrass him, I suppose. I think
Hmm.
that would be a political mistake on his part because Trump might get sympathy for that. What he should get, of course, is he should get as a first time offender. He's 78 years old. They should never send him to jail. He would have to go to Rikers Island, which is a very violent place. And it would be the bottom of the barrel to send him
Oh,
there. That would be such a terrible political stunt to do that. So if he did sentence him, I would think that Trump's legal team would rush to the appellate court to try to get a stay of that order.
okay.
So there's a lot that will be going on here. This judge is so prejudiced against Trump, it's not out of the question that he would sentence him to jail. Uh, he may sentence him to jail um, and give him a stay pending appeal. He could do that. He could sentence him to 2 years and say, okay, but this is stayed as you go through your appeal. Sometimes a judge will do that.
Can you
Will
explain what a stay means?
Okay, I
Explain it.
should say that a stay means you don't put the order into effect. For instance, I can fine you $1,000 right now
Okay.
and say I'm going to stay the fine. That is to say, you don't have to pay it until you go to an appellate court, and the appellate court says yes, the fine was properly issued. Now you can pay it. So, in other words, often, and I believe this happens with a lot of uh, defendants who are convicted of something. In many cases, the court says, well, you've got an appeal. You may win your appeal. You don't have to go to jail right now.
Okay.
You
So in
wait
the
until,
interim, you can, whatever. I don't, they do house,
yeah,
I don't know what they do at
report.
that point.
Yeah, in the interim, you can report to the probation office, or in the interim, you can put an ankle bracelet on, or
Oh,
some such, or I'm
God.
going to give you certain conditions. I'm not going to allow you to
Sure.
leave Manhattan, for
Can't leave the
example. He
state.
could do
Right.
that. He could do all kinds of things that are silly that would sort of mess up Trump's campaign. What he's going to do, I don't know, but I do
Hmm.
know that this case should have should have a 99% chance of getting overturned on appeal. Not that
Sure.
anybody will care when that happens.
Right. That's what it is. It's so strategic, keeping him off the campaign trail, putting him in prison, taking away. I mean, this really, wow. If anybody could have written a book to stop President Trump from running again, this definitely would have been the playbook. And I know they've tried everything underneath the sun already to stop him. You said that the prison that they would send him to is bottom of the barrel and it's so dangerous. That sounds horrible.
It's really the worst people in the world there. And then, of course, there are a lot of people there that are convinced that Trump is like Hitler, and it would be a good thing to kill him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he at least gotten severely thrashed, or someone would try to kill him, stab him, whatever. A lot of these inmates have sharp objects that they've secreted, so it's not that's not uncommon. So for him to go to jail would be close to a death sentence.
My heart is just broken, not only for President Trump, and I do appreciate President Trump on many levels. So I'm a little biased because I do really think that he's been a great president and that this is a horrible, uh, just total mistreatment of him. But just the fact that we can do this to someone now, what does this mean for America's future as far as the justice system and if it can be manipulated like this?
Well, you just said it. You said there are two things. Both our government and our journalism has gone into the wastebasket. And those are very, very much pillars of democracy.
Mm,
You need a government that operates under the rule of law. They're bending the law. Remember, the main prosecutor that came up with this whole deal was sent from Washington, D.C. He had a very high position in Biden's Justice Department. Then he went to New York to sort of
Hmm.
pull this off. And then you combine that with the biased press, which
Right.
again you find in Russia, you find Pravda is a propaganda organ. Well, a lot of our mainstream media outlets have become propaganda organs. They're not
Yeah.
really there to tell both sides of the story.
Right.
So I see our
So sad.
democracy, Debbie, really going down the tubes here.
Right, John. And we talk a lot about the beauty and the freedom of America and our Constitution. And we also talk at Moms for America a lot about socialism and communism and that it is here in America, right? The communist playbook was, destroy the family, take over the educational system, uh, you know, take over the churches, take over the justice system. And this is where we're at. This is just an example of freedom no longer being not being what it should be, being having constitutional rights and a justice system that follows the law. And these are very big implications for America's future because I guess what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And now we've set a precedent for things like this to be happening. And I know they are across the country, but something like this is just really it's a laughing stock and so many of these attorneys that I've listened to, they're like, this is something that should never, ever, ever have been handled this way. And it is a joke and it would be appealed. But like you said, it'll be all after the election and they will have him as a convicted felon.
What's interesting about it is this is not a two-way street. I think uh, the Republicans won't do the same thing.
Mm,
Right now, you'll hear a Democrat say, "Oh, Trump is a terrible, revengeful man. He's going to get into office and he's going to wreak revenge." Well, when he got into office the first time, he
mm,
didn't do anything about Hillary Clinton, did he? Even
no,
though it was clear she could be convicted for something,
right,
he let that go, and it was the right thing to do. It would look like it was vengeful for him to have done that. Um, so you won't find both sides. The temptation is to say that both sides are playing the same way. They're not. Usually you find this type of activity with an ideologically driven authoritarian type of political party, as in Cuba or Russia or someplace
right,
like that. Whereas the Republican Party in this country is more on the side of individual freedom and
absolutely,
and more on that wavelength, and it's not ideological. There are ideas on the conservative side, but it's not an ideology, an
right,
all-encompassing one. Conservatives are allow people to worship as they please, and
right,
that can be an ideology, a religious ideology. That's perfectly fine. It's in our Constitution,
sure,
but not a political ideology whereby everyone is being controlled by
right.
some thought process.
I
So
gotcha.
that's the difference, and
Yeah,
that's what's happening here. I think uh, if I were a Democrat, and I was years ago, and I saw the party going the way it's going now, it's being controlled by the extreme people.
right.
The Democrats all talk about the Republicans being controlled by these terrible extremists now. The extremists are the progressives who are running the Democratic Party, and it's too bad.
Yeah. It is. It's too bad. What would you do if you were Donald Trump's attorney? What advice would you give him? Just love to hear from you, John. You've been so insightful.
I think I think it's hard for him to do. He has to say that this was a biased trial.
Right.
Um, I think I think he should keep doing what he's doing. That's all he can do. I would hope. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to write as much as I can about the trial to get out the real story of this. There are only a
Yeah.
couple people out there doing it. Um, Andrew McCarthy of the National Review does a good job of it, but other than that, you won't find anybody out there really explaining to the public why this is
Yes. You need to be out there.
this
You need to be on CNN telling
how
them.
this happened. How did this occur?
Yeah.
People understand that Trump is out there saying that it was a rigged trial, but
Right.
everyone thinks this is just Trumpian hyperbole. It's another Trump. Oh, Trump's just ranting and raving. Oh, isn't it terrible? He's ranting and raving. But people aren't really getting down to explaining why and how
Mhm.
this thing got where it got. Most people today, if you asked them what the illegal conspiracy was that Trump was charged with, they'll say, oh, paying off Stormy Daniels, meeting with Michael Cohen and
Mhm.
David Pecker, the National Enquirer, to kill these stories of salacious conduct. That isn't what the case was about at all.
Mm.
The public thinks
Yeah.
that, the jury thought that, but technically it boiled down to whether or not there are these tiny, tiny falsehoods in documents that are gathering dust in Trump Tower. And
Right.
it's not about anything salacious at all. And it's not really about the election, Debbie. And although it supposedly was an election conspiracy,
Right.
it really wasn't.
Yeah, that's why I just wanted to thank you to Pam for finding someone that is so knowledgeable about this. I just felt like this is something everyone needs to understand for all of the reasons that we discussed today. We have to understand what's happening to the former president of the United States, what they're doing to him, what this means for democracy, our republic, what it means for the future of America. And when they can do things like this to him, we know that they can basically, like you said, they can do this to anyone. And they're, this is a very slippery slope that is very dangerous for us. And as moms, we're terrified of things like this because if you don't have a fair justice system and we don't honor the Constitution in America, then what hope do we have for our children?
Well, they're still going after people. They're going after people who appear and speak too loudly before the PTA
Right?
or the school board, I should say,
They
not the
sure are.
PTA, but the school board.
Yeah.
That's a terrible thing. I got a call from a friend of mine in another part of the country just the other day, and the FBI is trying to find out if her son had anything to do with going into the Capitol building on January 6th. They know he was in Washington, D.C. Oh my. They're trying to find out if he was one of the guys wandering around. And
Mm.
think about that. We're using our taxpayer dollars for things like that, really free speech.
Right. I
This
know.
young man goes to Washington to protest the election, and now he's 3 years later, he's still being investigated by our government.
Yeah.
It's really, this, but it's political. I mean,
It is. It's political.
I'm very much a law enforcement person. And
Right.
if there was any indication that the fellow was smashing windows or doing anything like that or breaking down doors, yes, they should investigate
100%.
it. Sure,
Correct.
sure they
Correct.
should. But we have this situation where we have all these riots and I mean,
Burning of
and
cities, everything.
burning of
Right.
cities,
Vandalism, everything.
and that's okay if it's for one's political benefit,
Yeah.
but then so I think the system's gotten out of whack. It's very politicized, especially on the left side of the political
Sure is.
spectrum, and everything becomes political.
Wow.
We
Well,
can't
our
we
prayers are, yeah. Our prayers are with President Trump because we really want him to be treated fairly, and clearly he's not. So we're going to just pray that a miracle happens for not only him, but for the justice system. I mean, this needs to be fixed and everyone should be held accountable. Like you said, fair is fair.
Yeah, it is. And I hope we can straighten this out. And I hope there's a real revolt among the people, not an actual revolt, but a mental realization about exactly what happened here and
Mhm.
and some sort of outrage about this.
I don't know, John, if you have just a couple minutes here at the end. I mean, we talked a lot about this trial. Thank you for explaining it all and helping us understand this. But I think we would be a little remiss if we did not mention that one of your claims to fame is that you had connection with one of the most famous political scandals of all time, Watergate. Can you tell us just real quickly? I know this is probably many a books and probably 3 podcasts, but what was your involvement with Watergate? I mean, we've got to end with this. What a story.
Uh, Actually, my father's partner was involved in Watergate as a good guy. He was one of the people convicted in the so-called Saturday Night Massacre, not convicted, but fired from his job as Attorney General. But I had taken an interest as a young man in determining who Deep Throat was, the mysterious figure that was the source for Bob Woodward during the Watergate affair. And I had concluded back in 1976 that it was probably Mark Felt, the number 2 man in the FBI. I kept that to myself. I didn't think anybody would care what some young lawyer thought. So it wasn't until years later when my daughter and her friends were visiting the house for a dinner they're from Stanford University down the freeway, and they come over for a feast. And I learned that one of them, the grandfather of one of them, was Mark Felt. And I said to him, "Well, Nick, do you know your grandfather's Deep Throat?" And at that point, I began talking to his grandfather, who had always denied being Deep Throat, trying to convince him that I knew who he was and that he should come out while he's still alive. He was an elderly man, and tell his story. But here's where let me leap forward, and we did some fun things with him, and I wrote a book with him and so forth. But one of the things I found out was that in Watergate, the Post, which has gotten all sorts of laurels for its wonderful journalism, which got the world rid of Richard Nixon, that journalism withheld a lot of important facts from the public, and Nixon was very unfairly treated. So I wrote a book called Postgate, in which I talk about how the Washington Post actually covered up Watergate. It knew far more about the scandal than Nixon did. Nixon did not know who had been involved in the burglary that started off the whole thing. He had no idea, nor did his intimates in his close aides. They could never figure it out. The Post knew. So it's unfortunate that that's where this whole thing started, and people understood that, hey, you can get wealthy, have best-selling books, movies, the paper can get Pulitzer Prizes, and all you have to do is tar some political figure, especially if he's the fellow on the other side of the fence. The Washington Post was always a Democratic paper. When they were founded, they founded themselves as the organ of the Democratic Party back in 1870s, whenever it was. So that's what happened during Watergate, and I wrote a book because of that, because I'm very concerned about the press, about journalism. How did we get this way? How did it turn out that our press became so politicized and so partisan? And it all started with Watergate. I mean, papers have always had bias to them. Don't get me wrong; they all have.
Right.
But
to
there
cover
hasn't.
up, right?
But to cover up facts, to be political with the facts, not just the opinions on the opinion page, but to withhold facts from the public or lie about the facts to the public, is really the hallmark of much journalism today. And it really bothers me. But it all started with Watergate. So Watergate is a scandal, but it's a scandal that involves journalism. Journalists are not the heroes of Watergate, in my view. They're one of the culprits. Now, I'm not here to say that everything that Richard Nixon did was wonderful, but and he was a hardball player, but boy, he did not deserve what he got.
And
And
for
they're doing the
us,
same thing to Trump.
exactly, it's kind of a circle here that I'm looking at it, and it's not as we thought, right? Pam was saying, so does that mean all the president's men is inaccurate? I mean, so we really we got to look at things a little bit differently, according to you.
Read my book Postgate.
Yeah.
It takes over 100 pages to explain all the errors and the way they covered it up. But
Wow.
I tried to make a concise book. It's about 250 pages, and about half of it is my experience with the Post and its figures. The other half talks about the deception in their reporting, and I make it pretty simple for people to understand and go to my sources. I'm not just making stuff up. It's not a ranting and a raving. I'm a lawyer, and I try to do it as clearly and concisely as I can do it, and show people exactly what happened, what the Post knew, and when they knew it.
Wow. Well, this is amazing to have you comment on today's political landscape, and then think about just what you have done in your entire career. John, thank you for joining us and explaining this, helping us through this process, understanding the importance of it, and just really giving us a good piece of education today on what's happening with President Trump and our legal system. So you're the best. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
All right. Thanks, John. Have a great day. Thanks, John. What an interesting interview. Wow. I just so appreciated his time here today to really get things clear for us as much as we can, right? We're not attorneys, but so helpful, and we so appreciate your time. Also, if you're trying to look for maybe some articles, some books written by John, you can go to postgatebook.com. A lot of articles there and a lot of information on Watergate and what's happening in today's culture legally. So go ahead and check that out at postgatebook.com. And as always, thank you, moms, for joining us here at Moms for America podcast. We're so glad every week that we get a chance to come by and share some really interesting interviews with amazing people on different topics every week. We do have quite a variety of a library of our Moms for America podcast. You can go to our website, check them all out. Again, we are on all platforms and all video platforms as well. And when you do stop by Moms for America, please sign up for our newsletter. That's how we communicate with you, moms. You just go there, you sign up every week. You'll get some correspondence from us, a great blog, information, webinars, seminars. Again, of course, the podcast. So we have so much information for you, moms. When you're at our website, also check out the Cottage Meetings. That's our signature program. There's 12 amazing lessons that teach you about America's history and the principles of liberty. So check it all out at Moms for America. I so appreciate you making me a part of your day. We absolutely love you here at Moms for America. I will see you next week. And as always, let's keep changing our world one home at a time. Love you, moms, and talk to you soon.